Another new effect introduced in CS4 is Bilateral Blur. This is one of those smart blurs that has an edge detection built in, so it blurs the smooth sections in between edges but keeps the edges sharp. It's good for both corrective and for stylized looks, but it also has a few gotchas I want to show you. Now here's a piece of video supplied by Adobe, and you'll notice that we've got some details in this fog and smoke around the car. We have some nice sharp outlines of where the headlights are, a little bit of detail in the packing crates off to the side. Say that we want to give this scene a much more dreamlike look. I've selected my clip already, and apply Effect, Blur and Sharpen, Bilateral Blur. And you see immediately we have that dreamlike look. And what's happened here is that the background and these other soft areas have now gotten blurred out. You'll notice we have a lot less detail in the fog here, but we still have sharp lines around the headlights and such. Now, if you've been watching, something else has happened here too. You might have noticed that the color is very desaturated, very much grayscale. For some reason, Bilateral Blur defaults to having Colorize turned off. You want to turn it back on to get some of the color back into your scene. And we'll be playing with that more a little bit later on. Here's a second example of maybe a more corrective use of Bilateral Blur. I'm going to go ahead and move up to 200% here so you can see a little bit of the detail in this woman's face. Now we've got a little bit of problem here with some film grain and maybe some compression artifacts that's adding a bit of mottling to her skin. You also see some lines around her face. This is another thing that a smart blur like Bilateral Blur is very good at. So apply Effect, Bilateral Blur. Now by default, we have this very soft blown out grayscale image. We'll colorize to get the color back, but still a bit on the soft side. You'll find that quite often you need to reduce the radius, which is the blur amount, and the threshold, the edge detection, to get some of this detail back in. Be prepared to spend a little bit of time honing in, and you'll see these numbers get very touchy. We'll get to values where they seem to have like no effect, such as 1 or 2 in this case, and I'll put in 4, and just that change will give me a little bit of that smoothing that I want to get some of this modeling and the lines out of her face. Now to get a little bit of detail back, I'll set the threshold down to around 8. Now here's the other strange thing about Bilateral Blur. It is GPU accelerated. However, once you get to very low values of radius and threshold, rendering takes a long time. If you find yourself losing patience tweaking in some of these more corrective looks, you might want to use a smart blur effect that was introduced a couple of versions ago. I find it's a bit more responsive at these lower values. I've gone back down to viewing 100%, and you see this actually looks pretty good now. We've really cleaned up a lot of the spots and the lines around her face. But you can also use this effect in a much more creative sort of way. And I want to show you a tip I've learned on how to get that colorization look a little bit more natural. Here's another clip, a windsurfer, a lot of detail in it, a lot of noise in it, a little bit of compression artifact from the JPEG. I'll select the clip, apply Bilateral Blur again, and again I get this really sort of kind of blown out look to the whole image. If I select Colorize, I'll get my color back, but even here the colors are a bit washed out. I can reduce my radius of the blur. Here I'm down to 20, still a bit washed out. Well, here's a trick to get some of that colorization sharpness back while still keeping this dreamlike halo. With the layers still selected, choose Effect, Channel, CC Composite. The CC effects are installed free with After Effects if you have a full commercial version. Unfortunately, you don't get them if you've got an educational version or a demo version. There's CC Composite. I'll say go ahead and apply the original in color mode. So now I've got the sharp colors of the original unprocessed image, the composite original, but I still have some of that dreamlike haze that Bilateral Blur adds. Now I've got more of a dreamlike look. You've heard us talk about this filmic glow effect that we're very fond of. You can do the same thing here with Bilateral Blur. Pick other modes, such as overlay, and now you'll get that heightened saturation, but still a bit of glow and a bit of smoothing out of the image that makes it look much more dreamlike and filmic, while still making it a very readable image in the end. So there's a few tricks with Bilateral Blur.